the Watchdog on Wall Street podcast, explaining the news coming out of the complex worlds of finance, economics, and politics, and the impact it will have on everyday Americans. Author, investment banker, consumer advocate, analyst, and trader, Chris Markowski.
All right. Holy trains, planes, and automobiles. No trains. Jesus. Back and forth from New York to Duluth, Minnesota, and spent less than 24 hours altogether. A lot of back and forth, that's for sure. That's why doing the podcast a little bit later on in the day than I usually do. But anyway, on the mention this, start off today, because everybody knows we started off the Watchdog on Wall Street radio show 20 years ago. I used to spend a great deal of time. Majority of the time on the program was just covering ripoffs and scams and warning people about all the monsters that are out there in the world trying to take advantage of others. And my radio show, I used to get pretty hot and bothered. I mean, really hot and bothered. More hot and bothered than I get now. Oftentimes raising my voice, getting angry. And I slowly but surely over the years calmed down in regards to that, because the yelling didn't help. It was a bit of an exercise in futility. Human nature doesn't make people very good investors. And we've talked about the two types of bait that work: greed and fear. Greed and fear set the trap. And I can't tell you how many times over the years we get phone calls and emails and whatnot, advising people, conversations back and forth with people, warning them about certain outfits, certain firms out there that they wanted to invest with that we knew were going to rip them off. And the overwhelming majority of the time, people, they don't listen. They don't listen. They're going to do what they want to do. They end up convincing themselves. Anyway, I was watching on the way back to New York this morning, the Theranos documentary that was done by HBO. And it was fascinating. We covered the Theranos, the blood testing scam. They actually had a behavioral economist on the documentary, and he talked about an experiment that he ran. And it's where you have somebody in front of you and you roll a dice, and you get the amount of money that the die shows up. So if it's a 2, you get a 2. It's a 5, you get a 5. It's one part. So they start off the thing. Then they change it and they say, you have to decide in your mind before I roll the dice whether you get the top side of the die. For example, on a die, there's a 2, and on the flip side, there would be a 5. You have to decide what side or ahead before you roll that you're going to choose, the bottom or the top. And they conducted that experiment with a bunch of people, and they found that, well, yeah, people, statistically, people were getting very, very lucky. Again, they didn't ask them ahead of time. The people were asked to be honest and tell them what side they wanted to pick, even though they didn't have to offer that information up until after the die was thrown. Interesting. And people lied. People lied. Oh, they hooked people up as well while they were doing this. They hooked people up to a lie detector test, and it could detect when they were lying. They're going to throw another wrinkle into this test, and I found it fascinating what they did. They did the same test, but they told the people that the money that you get, you still had to pick the top side of the die or the bottom side of the die, would go to a charity. Now, not only did everybody lie just about every single time, well, statistically, that's how it kind of worked out. But what happened in the end, which again I found fascinating, is the lie detector machine couldn't pick up that they were lying. So what does this mean? Well, I have a litany of ripoffs and scams that we're going to be talking about this weekend on the program. I am. We're going to talk about them. Maybe somewhat on this weekend's program, but most certainly on next weekend as well. We're compiling a lot of information right now and putting stuff together. It's almost going to kind of be like a blast from the past type of a scenario. One of the things that we talk about is, affinity fraud. How do these con artists out there, how do they go about invading churches and whatnot? How can they lie so easily? Well, they convince themselves, and this is how they mix this into their various different sales pitches, that they're doing the right thing. They can be very, very convincing. Just like, hey, the people rolling the die, lying about whether they picked the top side or the bottom side, because what difference does it make? The lie was okay. The money was going to charity. Funny how these con artists are able to manipulate things. It really is. But actually, I do have a list here, and you wouldn't believe it if I told you. You're not going to believe what I'm going to tell you right now. I almost guarantee it. I have a list of investment firms, fake regulatory agencies, other outfits out there that's over 120 pages long. These are businesses that are in existence today. This was provided to me by the Securities and Exchange Commission. Now, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and I give them kudos for putting this together. But the reality is the Securities and Exchange Commission's they're not police officers. They don't carry guns. They put the list out. Most people won't know about it. And most people will continue to do business with these con artists from all over the country. Yeah, the list is that long. Yeah, sometimes you think things that are getting better, but the reality is oftentimes in complete opposite. And obviously this list proves it. So yes, we're going to be talking about this at a little greater length, and I'm going to continue to hit on some of these ripoffs and scams and stuff that we get on a regular basis. Anyway, This morning, I'm up early. I'm on my way to the airport, and I do a guest appearance that I do every morning at 4:45 Eastern time. And I had gotten word at that point in time that there was this attack on 2 oil tankers in the Gulf of Oman. You got to understand where this is in relation to Iran, Pakistan, the rest of the Middle East. The radio show was on. The questions were flying at me. Like, do you think that this is Iran? And I kind of threw the host off, I think, a little bit by saying, no, I don't. I don't understand the motivation. Why would Iran do that? They are already in deep trouble as far as their economy is concerned. I find it hard to believe that they're going to all of a sudden want to start getting into a possible shooting war in that area of the world. I don't like feeling this way. I don't. But I oftentimes don't trust any of the narratives that are put out there. We're still getting more information in regards to the supposed gas attack by Assad on his own people. And a lot of the information that I've been getting from various different sources is that wasn't true. Wasn't true. I wasn't convinced of it at the time. Because I'm scratching my head. I said, why the hell would he do that? He knows that's going to send the United States after them. So I don't know who did this. I mean, we've heard about the Gulf of Tonkin and weapons of mass destruction with George Tenet and George W. Bush. It's a slam dunk that they're there. I'd be very careful when it comes to this and this story right now. Anyway, moving on here. This is kind of an economic story that goes along with the all the wizards of smart that are running for the presidency under the donkey label. Cory Booker Cory Booker's got another idea. I talked about this here on the program, how slowly but surely the ideas are going to get more and more nuts. It's going to get full crazy, utter economic lunacy. I'm just waiting for that point in time where it's going to be free beer, when they're just going to say, you know what, we're just going to start handing out free beer. Okay, Cory Booker's latest idea. Listen to this entitlement. A new refundable tax credit for tenants. Anyone that pays more than 30% of their before tax income would be eligible for the credit. That would cover the difference between 30% of a beneficiary's income and their rent. He says 57 million Americans would benefit, with the median family's tax credit coming in at $4,800. Again, another subsidy. How much time have I spent over the past several weeks talking about subsidies, whether it be in regards to healthcare, whether it be in regards to higher education, colleges and universities? Do you understand how perverse, the perverse incentives that this will create? Once a tenant passes the 30% threshold, every dollar of additional rent would be fully refunded by the IRS, by the Treasury, by you and I. At that point, renters would be entirely what? Price insensitive. They're not going to give a damn, are they? They're not going to care. So instead of taking a hard look at the cost of additional amenities, they could simply upgrade. Landlords would have a similar incentive to pile on free extras to max out the tax credit. Want an extra parking spot? More storage? An on-site gym? Sure, it's rolled into the lease and then it's billed to who? You and I. You and I. Wall Street Journal wrote about this today as well, had a op-ed on it. Some people would probably upgrade neighborhoods. Why live 15 subway stops from work if the rent is capped at 30% of income? Making millions of tenants carefree about their next rent dollar, do you understand the type of price pressure it would put on housing prices? It's insane. Market distortions every single time the government gets involved in the free market. They screw it up. I'm going to give you my Starbucks coffee. And now, it could be Starbucks, it could be Pete's, it could be whatever it may be. Let's all of a sudden we get some idiot running for president and comes out and says, I do decree that that we have an issue here. We've got an issue. Coffee is becoming too expensive. Yes, I myself was at a Starbucks and I couldn't believe what I had to pay for a price of coffee. So what I'm going to do, when I'm elected president of the United States, we are going to subsidize people's morning coffee to the tune of $3. Now let's just, for argument's sake, say that a cup of coffee is $5. Now the government is going to give you $3 for your cup of coffee. Ooh. What's Starbucks going to do? What would any other sane business person do? They already have the people buying the coffee now as it is. They already have it. They're already paying for it. Now they're going to realize that the government's going to subsidize it. They're going to raise their price by $3. The Journal writes about some of the disincentives to work with this. Imagine a waitress earning $25,000 a year. The tax credit would cover any rent above 30% threshold of $7,500 a year. Now, if she worked a little harder work some extra hours to increase her earnings to $26,000 a year, the threshold would rise to $7,800, eliminating $300 of the tax credit. Do you understand how that works? So she works to make an extra $1,000, but it's not really $1,000 anymore. It's only $700 because she's going to lose some of her tax credit. We talked about this before, with these donut holes when it comes to handouts and giveaways. There was a study that was done in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, with welfare in the state of Pennsylvania, where they recognized that someone who was on benefits programs, let's say making $30,000 a year, for it to be worthwhile for them to make more money, they would have to start making over $70,000 a year due to all of the things and all the government handouts and giveaways that they would lose. Now, the paper that Cory Booker put out made some points talking about the $201 billion each year that is, through the tax code that's subsidizing home ownership. Listen. The tax deduction for mortgage interest is a subsidy. Is it not? Is it not? It is a subsidy. They should have never done that in the first place. But who is that really helping? Anybody ever think about that? And I talk about eliminating the tax deduction for your interest on your mortgage. That was obviously reduced, but who was it a handout to? Was it really a handout? Was it really a benefit for the consumer? This is the trick, okay? It's a trick that the politicians, the people write the tax code, play. No, it was a handout to the real estate industry, the home building industry. Homes are like any other product out there. People are going to buy what they can afford, unless, of course, you're throwing free money at them. So, again, there's Cory Booker and his nonsense, and I'm not even sure what these people are going to come up with next. Yeah, I know I'm going to sound like a broken record on this, and whenever I bring it up, I don't know if people even care anymore. I really don't. I don't even really think they think about it anymore. Even sometimes, even Limbaugh on his program kind of poo-poos this whole national debt deficit spending stuff, which is, I find, amazing. Well, there's a Republican in the White House. Republicans get really bent out of shape when they're not in charge, when they don't have the White House, and they love talking about spending that's out of control. But once they're there, who cares? For the first time in the history of the United States, the federal government has spent more than $3 trillion in the first 8 months of the fiscal year. $3 trillion. Yeah. I mean, listen, tax revenues in the first 8 months, pretty good. Pretty good. Fell a little bit short of the record, but still pretty darn high. Second highest tax revenues ever collected. Second highest. We still ran a deficit over those 8 months to the tune of what, $738 billion plus. Again, people keep buying the debt. I understand that. But what happens? What if? And I played this game with people on the program. And people start talking about higher interest rates. What would happen? Do you understand the portion of our budget that our tax dollars that come in that are just interest payments? Most of our debt is in short-term loans. These short-term loans, the short-term debt is rolled over again and again and again. Think of it like a credit card. Think of it like a credit card where every single month you pay off the credit card with another credit card and then add to it. That essentially is how it works here in this country. That's how it works. Imagine all of a sudden, let's just say, what if we went back to, what if interest rates, what if the 10-year was at 5%, 6%? We're done. Our budget's busted. It's busted. And we take a look at this house of cards when it comes to governmental debt, not just here, but all around the globe. Everyone's looking at each other and they're holding the thing up. If there ever was, he would talk about a house of cards. He would talk about nonsense, corporate debt, big debt. No, it's government debt. It's government debt. And at some point in time, I don't know when it is, people are going to stop believing that this stuff can be paid. Take me back to 2010. Take me back to 2010, and again, we covered this extensively. You had Greece, use Greece as an example. It wasn't just Greece. Italy, Spain, Portugal, Ireland, they all ran into big-time governmental debt issues. I'm familiar with what took place in Greece. Everything was cut. Massive amounts of austerity. People's pensions cut in half, even more in some cases. Why? Because all of a sudden people stopped believing. They stopped believing. They said, wait a second, these books, these aren't right. This country shouldn't be borrowing money at these rates. And the interest rate on Greek debt went up. I mean, it was nonsense in the first place. It was. They were borrowing money at almost the same rate the Germans were borrowing money at. It made no sense whatsoever. It was the same reason why we told you that the Puerto Rican debt was going to be a disaster. Fundamentals matter. All right, moving on to the latest here on Huawei. They canceled the launch of a new laptop and they paused production at its personal computer business because of the restrictions on buying U.S. components. And this is also now looking to morph into phones as well. I'm sure that this is going to come up as a part of the trade negotiations in some way, shape, matter, or form. And whether we want to believe it or not, which had the big win, we talked about it here on the program when it came to Mexico. I think that this is going to end up turning out in a positive light. I know we have the G20 coming up within the next couple weeks, and I've got a sinking suspicion that both sides, both parties are going to be in a mood to get something done. All right, I'm going to go off the beaten track here a little bit. I actually got a couple emails on this from some of our listeners. I also got a phone call from my mother on this one as well. My thoughts, people are aware. They've been following what I do, who I am, what I'm all about, and how I coach kids and been involved with sports for a very, very long time. And what my thoughts were on the 13-0 win by the U.S. women's soccer team against, who was it, Thailand. How should I put it this? Let's just say I'm not rooting for the United States team anymore. I'm not. I'm going to be rooting against them. I've been in this position with kids where I've coached teams where, where we were much better than our opponents. Much, much better than our opponents. And I had a various different ways that we would deal with that. Sometimes it's hard. They're kids. They're going to want to put the ball in a net. I would call timeout, and I would have the kids over to the sideline, and I'd say, listen, before anybody can take a shot, we have to make X number of passes in a row. And I said, try not to yell them out loud when you're there. You don't want to embarrass anybody. I'll maybe give you a sign when you can go, but I don't want to see you guys shooting the ball anymore. And sometimes it's hard. I get that. Sometimes it's hard. Now, again, this is people making the argument. This is the highest level of soccer, right? For women, you're supposed to be able to just to, I guess, play at the level that you need. Okay, all right. I'll take that argument with you. Fine. You want to run the score up? Fine. But you do not. And in a sport like soccer, I don't know, what is the football equivalent of 13-0? 13-0 in soccer, I think the football equivalent would probably be like 120 or 130-0. If you actually think about it. Probably about 130, 140-0 is the equivalent. You're jumping up and down. You're sliding. You're doing all sorts of celebration dances after you score a goal. It's soccer. I'm telling you right now, once it gets to 4 or 5, no more celebrating. You can go out there, you could shake your teammates' hands, and that's about it, and you go back. If I ever saw any of my players act the way these members of the U.S. women's soccer team would, they'd be off the field. I would embarrass them. Loud. I don't care. And sit their ass down on the bench. You don't do that. And you had all of these kids that were watching this thing, and that's the example you want to set? Is you beat your opponent and then you rub it in against an obviously inferior opponent. If I ever saw one of my kids do that, you're celebrating, you're beating a much weaker opponent? What's wrong with you? So again, there, you wanted my answer? I give you my answer. I'm rooting for anybody else except the U.S. team. WatchDogOnWallStreet.com, our site, WatchDogOnWallStreet.com. Our newsletter, consultations with our certified financial planners, all sorts of great things at our site, WatchDogOnWallStreet.com, or give us a call, 800-471-5984. That number again, 800-471-5984.